Hi everyone, Ben and I are back this week for another episode of Strange Encounters Down Under, and this time we've got a special guest, Karina Machado. Welcome to the show, Karina.
Welcome, Karina.
Hi Cheryl, hi Ben. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
You're welcome. I've spoken to you before. For those people who don't know Karina, she's a journalist, an author and a podcaster, and she's written 3 books, Spirit Sisters, Where Spirits Dwell, and Love Never Dies, which we'll get into in this episode. But Karina, I just wanted, it's an interesting thing that you got involved in this area, and everyone's got a story. But I remember, because you've spoken to my Afterlife group before, and I was looking, it was April 2020 when you spoke.
Oh.
Yeah, and time flies, doesn't it?
Goodness.
So, and I was listening to you talk about how your mother influenced your thinking due to the stories that she told about her foreknowledge of family members passing. So please do tell us some of that.
Yes, that'd be most interesting.
Oh, sure. I love to share this, and I have shared this before. It is very close to my heart, this story. So Mum is a big influence in my life. I think she instilled in me my love of story, my love of words, my love of literature, but it was the passion for the afterlife, I think, or I guess that's probably not the best way to describe it, more the curiosity that she sparked. And it's kind of a quest into these sacred mysteries, I think, that she sparked with, as you said, Cheryl, a couple of key stories that she shared with me when I was at around the age of 7, which was also an age where, and I think you two can probably relate, so many people can, you begin to question as a young child, or some of us do, what is life about, and what is life and what is death and what comes afterward. And, a lot of kids will have a kind of almost a morbid fascination for scary stories. And yeah, so I was like that. I was very interested. And in that time in the 70s as well, we had a few key movies. There were some scary ones, The Amityville Horror, The Omen, and I think they all,
classics.
They were classics. And Jaws, that's a different story, but totally scarred by Jaws. But yeah. And so it was at around that time that my mum shared with me that she had experiences as a young woman growing up in Uruguay, which is where I was born. And I was 2 when my family immigrated to Australia. And the stories also worked as a link between me and my heritage. And they were almost like, I guess the stories in a way became family. And then I extended that onto my readings. I was always a passionate little reader, and the Enid Blyton stories and the Narnia Chronicles, and then the very cheap non-fiction paperbacks that I'd pick up at Woolies that were, great mysteries of the world and world's greatest ghost stories. And I can't remember, they cost a couple of bucks, and I just popped them in the trolley, and my parents allowed me to do that, which was great. But so my mum's stories arose kind of within that whole, kind of soup of formation. I was going to say conditioning, but that's not the right word either. It was just kind of this fascination that grew in me and around me to learn more. And the stories had to do, as Cheryl said, with, so there was one very powerful story that she shared about being a young, she was probably only about 15 and working at a boutique in Uruguay, a children's wear boutique. And my mum's always had an incredible work ethic, and she a very hard worker even at that young age. But something on this particular day would not leave her alone. It was a thought, and the thought said, you must go to your cousin Yolanda's house. Now, Yolanda was a 4-year-old little cousin that was my mother's cousin that was in the family, and very odd thing for my mother to feel compelled to have to leave her work, tell her boss, I'm sorry, I just have to go home and collect her mother and her aunt and kind of drag them really to this little Yolanda's house. So they got on the bus, the three of them, my mother, my great aunt, my grandmother, and they went to this relation's house. And so Yolanda's mum was sitting out on the porch when they arrived, and she was drinking mate, which is a tea. I don't know if you know of it, but in Uruguay and Argentina, we drink this special tea out of a steel straw, and it's a communal thing, but people also have it individually. And she was just having that, everyday kind of encounter. And so the ladies stayed talking to Yolanda's mum, and my mum went straight in to be with her little cousin, and she found her in bed. So the context was that it was known that Yolanda hadn't been well, but that was it. That's all that was known. And on that particular day, the little girl was in bed, and my mum went and sat with her, and she was asleep, Yolanda. And then she woke up and she said, oh, I need to go to the bathroom. And my mum said, I'll help you. And she said, oh, no, I'm okay. And she just got into her little slippers and went to the loo and then came back. And then not long after that, she looked at my mum and said, tengo miedo, which means I'm afraid. And a little trickle of blood came out of her mouth. And not long after that, she actually passed away. So something had propelled my mum to Yolanda's bedside to be with her that night, to be with her little cousin as she was taking her final breaths. And it later emerged that she had leukemia, but in what was considered at the time, so when would it have been? The early 60s, I guess, an act of mercy. That news was retained. It wasn't shared with the mother. The father knew, and some other elders in the family, but Yolanda's mum didn't know that her daughter was terminal. And so that story really, pulled on the heartstrings for me. And there was another one that also involved a family member where my mum was in the kitchen and she was cooking, and again, young woman, and the radio was on, so it might have been a weekend, nice vibe in the house. And then suddenly my mum turned down the music and said, or she actually turned it down, or she definitely said, turn the music down, uncle is dead. Now, the context there is that my grandfather's house where my mum lived butted up against another house where his brother and his family lived. So uncle lived over the back fence. And in that moment, her auntie came running in and said to alert my grandfather that her husband had collapsed. My grandfather ran, and one of my mother's last memories of her late uncle is seeing my grandfather just desperately trying to revive him, in a kind of a crude form of CPR that he probably didn't know. But she remembers that he kind of rubbed every chest hair off his chest, trying so hard to revive his brother. But so her uncle was only something like 42, and he'd just passed away of a cardiac arrest, completely out of the blue. So, and somehow she'd known it just minutes before her auntie rushed in. So there were those stories. And also being immigrants as we were to a new country, we would meet up with, this is the other thing that was going on at around that time, we would meet up with other families that were immigrants, and we'd do a thing called La Copa, which is essentially a Ouija board, a seance. But it never had a sinister overtone. It had always, to me anyway, a mysterious and a sacred overtone, because it was their way, or one of their ways, of connecting with their family left behind in the old country and trying to connect with loved ones that had passed there. And so to me, it always seemed like a beautiful way of reaching out and of connection. So later, of course, in my research and everything, I came to learn that sometimes a Ouija board can, usher in some less than favorable spirits, depending on the circumstances. But in those early witnessing for me, I just saw some really poignant moments. And so that was happening at the same time as well. So yeah, Cheryl, so that's basically sort of the early years and the story of my mum. Yeah, thank you for asking.
Yeah, I just can't imagine my parents mucking around with the Ouija board. I don't think they'd do that. Well, not my mother anyway. My father probably, but not my mother.
No, mine either, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think that Latin American heritage, you know, and there is this idea, and my mum, and I guess also maybe the culture in terms of the way they approach death and the way perhaps Western countries, I don't know. Although I have heard stories of, you know, England and Ireland, Scotland, even Australia at around the same time, the 50s, where a loved one would pass away and they would be laid out at home. And that certainly happened in Uruguay. My mother attended a lot of funerals as a little girl with her grandmother. And so death was very near because there was poverty as well, and death was something very near. So maybe, you know, trying to connect with all those loved ones that had passed didn't seem like such an unusual thing. Yeah.
Maybe if you have strong connections and you're using a Ouija board, then you're not so prone to bring in the random, more chaotic entities, perhaps.
I agree with you, Ben. I do think, but that's something that I've only come to learn many years later, doing research, interviewing people, and seeing and hearing how, when there is a background of immense trauma or family dysfunction, any kind of abuse, there seems to be perhaps more of a chance that some kind of unsavory spirit like that will make itself known. It's not so much conscious intention, but I think there is a resonance between the subconscious and perhaps unhealed business as well within, and what approaches. Yeah
and we all probably have our own energy level and are prone to attracting a range of different things, and maybe even at different times in your life.
Absolutely. I think that's really true, and it is such a mystery. And you know, you can go into any sort of channeled material and you'll find any amount of theories about how many dimensions, how mmany layers of afterlife. Like, so as you say, there's everything out there in creation, you know. So
there's a lot to explore, but
it sure is.
How did you come to write your first book? Because that's the one I read, that one when it first came out, Spirit Sisters. So that was 2009, I think.
That's right. Yes. Spirit Sisters came out in 2009. So there were a few different paths that led to its creation, and one of them had to do with something that had arisen in me to want to celebrate these women's stories. So these stories that my mum had passed down, these connections that I was still seeing were evident around the table, sharing with female relatives, hearing these stories. I would go to lunch even with a publicist that is pitching books to me, because I was the books editor at Who magazine for many years, and she would have some wonderful stories, and we'd have great, you know, lunches, cup of coffee, listening. I'd listen to her stories, and she actually ended up playing a pivotal part in the publishing of Spirit Sisters, which is a nice little twist there. But yeah, so there was that. I was a young mum, and for me, there were some moments that were difficult, and I struggled a bit in those years, as a lot of mums do with the little ones. My children were both within 18 months of each other, and I found it hard, frankly, and many times, and so this idea was kind of like a lifeline. The idea, I'd always, as I said, I was always a reader, always a writer, even as a little kid. Like, I was one of those people that knew that was the only path for me. It wasn't like, oh, I might do this or I might do that. No, it was very narrow. And so the idea of writing a book that was full of the kinds of stories that I love to hear, that really began to entice me. And then at around that same time, we began to have some strange phenomena happen in our home. And that was the first time that had happened. And it was not myself who had the experiences, although I had some sort of peripheral experiences, but my husband began to see apparitions, like the full apparition in our home. So he saw 3 of them, very clear. He saw a little boy and a woman, and he saw a little girl who was so lifelike that he actually mistook her for our daughter, who was around 5 at the time. And so then, and I, as I said, I didn't see them, but the house was charged with a different energy. It was thick, very thick, the energy. There was some poltergeist activity, toys falling, and some big orbs coming up in photos and things like that. And so something had been sparked there, and I was very curious as to what it was. And we ended up finding out that these experiences for my husband correlated with him beginning to meditate. So for him, meditation and going into a different brain state comes very naturally, and he doesn't struggle with turning off the thoughts. And I think that very easily that portal opened. And then when I began to research Spirit Sisters, I put in a chapter. I thought I want to do a chapter called Awakenings, and that's in there. And that's all about sort of what are the circumstances that might contribute to this gift arising in somebody. And it turns out that meditation is, in some cases, the path that can spark this kind of awakening of a dormant gift. And so there was all of that. And then, so I had a lunch, as I said, with this lovely publicist, and she told me the story that she had seen a ghost. She had many ghost stories. And I said, oh, gosh, I love these stories so much. I would love to gather them in a book and call it Spirit Sisters. She said, that's a great idea. Why don't you write me a 1-page pitch and I will present it to the publisher for you? And I was so amazed that she would offer to do such a thing and get me like that step closer to the publisher. And I said, of course I will. I'd love to. And as it happens, a year went by and I still hadn't done that thing. And I was flicking through the Sunday Telegraph one day, and I saw that there was an article about this resurgence in people going on ghost tours and people being interested in the afterlife. And at around that time, I think there were shows like Medium and The Ghost Whisperer and other programs, but those two stick in my, that psychic show, The One, was around. And so I so I read this article, and it said that the article actually said that women were driving this, that it was women who were going to these things, and it was women who were leading the groups and all of this stuff. So I thought, oh my God, my idea, quick. So I did the 1-page pitch. It is quite a simple little pitch, I didn't have much. It had the title and a few key points about the book. I emailed it off, and the publicist said, oh gosh, I'm glad you did this because I'm leaving the company soon. So had I waited even a couple of weeks longer, I might have missed that window. But she did as she promised, and within a couple of weeks of emailing that, I had lunch with the publisher. She loved the idea and commissioned the book.
Oh, great.
So that's how Spirit Sisters came about. And and writing it was also quite a natural, lovely experience that flowed. It was, and it did give me that respite that I needed in that time when I was struggling with motherhood and things like that. So that's how I came to write it.
Right. So why do you think that it's women who were reporting those? And I find this like in the UFO field, and which has been in my field as well, it's often the women who were coming forward with close encounter reports. What is it about that women, have seemed to, maybe it's because they're open to reporting it more than males. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's exactly what I was going to say. I think, well, firstly, we can only speculate, but I think that it has to do with that women traditionally are more likely to be open about things, only perhaps because men have been conditioned, especially in the Western world, to not express, these kinds of ideas, and certainly maybe even to not express at all too much, So keep it zipped. But I feel like things are changing. I feel I'm seeing a shift, and still predominantly my interviewees on my podcast, Spirit Sisters, are women, but I have interviewed a couple of gentlemen, and they very openly and candidly have shared their stories. and it's very powerful. And I feel like this is coming up more often. I read a book actually recently by Whitley. Is it Whitley Strieber or Stryber? I never know how to pronounce it, but he's got an amazing story too. And he obviously is one of the pioneers and has shared so much. Sorry, I was just going to say, Ben, he's got the afterlife contact with his wife.
Yes, yeah, I think it's Strieber in America and Stryber in Australia.
Oh, okay.
What is it? Oh,
depending on your accent.
Yeah. Okay.
I call him Whitley Strieber. I've heard
Yeah.
like that in America, so that's what I refer to. But
yeah,
the book he's written called The Communion Letters, and in the back of that there is a chapter. I think it's just called The Dead. I can't remember now, but he talks about the connection between, which is one of my favorite subjects, the connection between people who report close encounters and them also reporting near-death experiences and after-death communication and that sort of thing. I was wondering too, do you think it might be because of those people perhaps use a different hemisphere of their brain or different parts of their brain that can be contacted? Because I know from many years of interviewing people who've had close encounters that they are often quite artistic people. They're very creative people, and they'll either use that creativity in artworks or performing, dancing, singing, whatever, or they'll use it in healing. So I've always wondered that, could it be something like that? What are your thoughts, Karina?
I do think it could well be something like that. I've pondered that too, Cheryl. What is it about? I mean, that's a question that really drove me for years and continues to drive my work as well to some extent. But why do some people have these experiences and others don't? I'm one of those that is not prone to these experiences. But I do think that is the way it's meant to be for me, because perhaps had I had them, I just would have continued on my merry way having them, and I wouldn't have done all of this work and all of these explorations. And that was, I believe, the path that I was meant to take, to kind of hold space for these stories as well. But I do believe that it could well be something like that. I don't know, and obviously we don't, nobody knows, but I wonder if the brain is a kind of a filter, and if we didn't have it, it would just, my gosh, it would be so overwhelming. Just today, I listened to a near-death experience. That's one of the areas that really interests me. And the experiencer was saying that the amount of love that she felt on that side, it is impossible. They all say it's impossible to describe, but she was saying that she understood that if we were to feel that here on Earth, we would literally explode. Like the body can't hold it. That energy, it can't be held. So then I wonder if the brain is a kind of merciful tool in a way to help us out here on the 3D plane, and whether some people have for whatever reason, something that predisposes them, whether it's some physiological aspect of the brain, or whether, we know about traumatic brain injuries, and we've all heard those stories about somebody who is struck by lightning or has a brain injury and then wakes up and they're either speaking a different language or they, all that. So we know that something happens there.
Look at conditioning too. I mean, you talk about Western conditioning where men are encouraged to basically to shut down, and then you go to countries like Brazil, where there is a vast variety of different paranormal experiences reported from men, women, children in a country of that culture, from little hairy dwarves to giants and everything else in between. So it's so you sort of see that you can shut it down, but I think even if you shut it down, and as you say, the brain filters that and perhaps protects us from it, there's those moments in time where it comes to you.
That is exactly right. That's what I've found from all my years interviewing too.
Yeah, regardless of whether you're ready for it or not, or expectant of it, it actually just appears, and then people can have those transformative shifts.
Yeah. And I love reading about those spiritually transformative experiences, near-death experiences. I just love the way it blows open someone's life and mind in for the most part, positive ways.
Yeah. Following on from your comments, Karina, about maybe the brain is a merciful tool, but I'm just thinking, I don't know how many times I've heard people who've had near-death experiences and report close encounters in those other states. They say things like, while I was there, I knew how the universe works.
Yeah.
But when they come back into their bodies, they can't retain the information. And like you say, maybe they'll explode. But yeah. I was listening to Alberto Villoldo, who's a shaman, just a couple of days ago, and he was talking about the 8th chakra, which is up here above the crown. He was saying that when we die, above our head, it creates like an egg. And within that egg is all the information about our experiences in this life are uploaded to that. And then they are, that egg moves to the parents that we've chosen, or to wherever we need to go next. And at the point of conception, this is a shaman's understanding, mind you, at the point of conception, that egg enters the new being in the mother's womb and creates the 7 chakras. But that egg, because it exists out of time, it then is empty because it's waiting to upload the new experiences of the new. But it's also the space of utter beauty and gloriousness that we all long to go back to after we die, so I was just wondering if somehow maybe at that point of death, all that information, and let's face it, if we tried to recall every single moment in our life, I think maybe our brains had exploded with that too. I don't know. And it goes back into this egg, which is, I guess it's probably infinite in its own way.
Wow, that's an amazing theory. I'd never heard, I'd heard things that sound similar to that, but that's fascinating. And I mean, how life actually begins is one of the most amazing mysteries. They know the science of it, but what sparks it? Who can know?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's amazing. And what you say about like remembering every moment reminds me of another key aspect of the NDE, which is the life review.
Yeah.
And I'm always just eternally fascinated by the life review. How can it be that this is reported in almost every NDE, crossing boundaries of culture, of gender, of geography, and it's just so amazing to me. And in that space, like you said, here we can't remember every moment, but over there, it's all there.
Yes.
It's all there, not just this life, but many others as well, and not just our own, but, one of the key things the NDEs say is when they're revisiting moments in their life, they know how others felt as well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Everything's there.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah. So your second book, Where Spirits Dwell, now you sort of shift gears with this because it's about hauntings.
Yeah.
How did that switch go? And where did all those stories come from?
Yeah, I think hauntings have always fascinated me as well. And I think, Spirit Sisters was a surprise bestseller. It surprised my publisher. It surprised me. And then it was published in England the year after. And so that made my publisher interested in whatever else I had. And what I had was the idea for a trilogy. And the trilogy was Haunted Houses next, and then the pure love stories, like the stories about love beyond the veil.
Yeah.
And so she went for the second. She said, okay, let's do the second one first. Came up with the idea Where Spirits Dwell, which was actually that title came from a quote that was in one of the stories in Spirit Sisters. So one of my interviewees said something like, I know the place where spirits dwell, and that just stayed with me. And so I thought, well, let's investigate hauntings. And I did a little bit of travel. I went to Tasmania, I went to Port Arthur, researched at Port Arthur, I went to the quarantine station. So I did those kind of classic places. I also went to England with my sister on a side trip, but while I was there, I did a little bit. I wrote a little bit about my travels there as well. But I didn't just want to do those kind of key classic locations. I also wanted to just get the anonymous stories, the stories that happen every single day in suburbia, but you don't really hear about them. Well, you didn't in those days, that much anyway, whereas now we're all sharing more. But so I tried to dig up a lot of those, and the stories came from various sources. So I did the same thing that I did for Spirit Sisters, which was put ads. Like back then, you were putting like ads in newspapers. I did that. I put a little ad in the Daily Telegraph. One of the ways I got so many stories for Spirit Sisters very quickly was I had a little an editorial mention in the Body and Soul supplement. So there was a story about hauntings, and they very kindly put me on the end and said, "Oh, author Karina is writing a book, blah blah." And so I still had a lot of contacts and stories that didn't fit into Spirit Sisters from that initial influx, and I went back to them, and that's how it came about. And of course, after what had happened in my own home with the spirits that my husband had seen, I wanted to explore that. And I did find out the history of the house where we lived was a little Californian bungalow. And I found out that, the name of the man and his wife and the children that he'd reared in that house in the 1920s. Whether it was them or not, we can only speculate again, but I was, it was nice to be able to potentially put a name to the faces, so to speak, that my husband saw. And so that was where spirits dwell. And I guess I'm still fascinated by hauntings. And as I mentioned earlier, why is it that one person can go into a home and experience things, and then they'll go away and new people come in, and it won't always follow that the new people have experiences. Sometimes it does, but not always. And a classic case is the Amityville Horror House in America, where, that family moved out, and then the new people say that there's never been a problem. So,
yeah. So you sort of mentioned before, or it caused me, whatever you mentioned caused me to ask you, do you think, I think Ben, you said it too, that people themselves can trigger or initiate these types of experiences? What do you guys think about that? Expand on it a bit more. I'm actually asking.
Ben, do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that. I think everyone has the potential to have these experiences. I don't think that you have to be some special gifted individual. I think that everyone has that innate ability. Turning it off is something that happens in people who probably have a lower spiritual level in some way. So, like people who just go to work and live fairly simple lives, right through to a Buddhist monk. But anyone at any point in time, that can certainly change. I've had my own ghostly experiences that we've discussed on other episodes. And they appeared to be all external to me when I had those experiences. And again, it was in a house that was known to be haunted at that time. So yeah, look, it's fascinating.
It's absolutely fascinating. And I do, so I agree. And it's a great point there about the person who is less willing to. My husband's a good example. He could be described as one of those people that is very happy to just go to work, come back, and he loves doing triathlon. So again, very much in the physical world, and what he's testing his limits of endurance and physicality. But yet, something happened when he went into that meditation, or those meditations all those years ago, that opened something up. And just as easily as it opened, he shut it down again.
Did he see them during the meditation, or did they appear after the meditation?
Oh, after. So we connected it later that at around that time he'd begun to meditate. But no, so when he saw them, so the first one was a little boy. He was just sitting on the couch watching telly. And so he wasn't asleep. He was wide awake. He's actually, he often stays up late and watching sports or something. Yeah. And he was awake, and he saw something to his left, and lo and behold, there was a little boy kind of peeking around the corner of the threshold between our kitchen and our bathroom, kitchen and lounge room. And he said he didn't feel afraid. He felt almost a tenderness towards him, like, oh, what's this little guy doing here? You know, where's he come from? And he said that he was kind of not entirely transparent, but not substantial either. And his colors were all kind of sepia tones. But he made eye contact with him and held it. And I can't remember who turned away first or what happened, but it went on for a good few seconds. And the second encounter, where he saw a woman in a red dress or red nightgown stroll across the hallway, that was very similar circumstances. He was just up late, you know, watching telly. And the third one, where he saw the little girl, that one I was actually there for. I wasn't asleep at that time. It was kind of a twilight summer's evening, and we'd just all had our dinner outside, and it was like the sun hadn't actually even gone down. And we were just, you know, getting the dishes back in, and he just suddenly, and I think I might have been just folding laundry in the room or something, and he came and he was just like wide-eyed and said, oh my gosh, I just saw this little girl. And I saw, like, it was interesting to be able to see him in that moment where he'd seen her, because I could see just kind of the shock and just wonder in his eyes. Yeah.
Wow, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really intrigues me how these things are triggered.
Yeah.
You know, again, along the lines of what you said before, I've found over the years that people who report close encounters often have trauma in their childhoods, or put in difficult situations, or a parent might be an alcoholic, or there might be one parent who's dead or just absent, or, you know, all those sorts of things. And often too, I've found that people who like, there's locations too where people see ghosts, like police stations and jails and hospitals, and around locations where there's intensity and crises, you know, that's where they often report them to.
And attachment too. So, you know, if you lived happily in your seaside little house for years and you died, then something of you remains in that place, potentially, if you have that type of connection to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I love this, and I love all the stories from suburbia. I think that, I mean, you've got the Port Arthurs and those sort of places. Anywhere where there's you know, historical misery, you're going to find ghosts, and, you know, and old towns have all got ghost tours, an extremely popular thing to do. But when you hear about ghosts in say 20-year-old suburbs of Melbourne or Brisbane or Sydney, then you sort of go, wow, that's really interesting. You know, those, you know, there's ghosts that are appearing, or entities or whatever are appearing in these places that may be connected to these houses from a newer period, not just a historical context.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm very fascinated by what goes on just next door, you know, what happens in suburbia, as you say. It's fascinating. And and also, to Cheryl's point about the trauma, I've noticed that too, Cheryl. And I remember picking that up as early as researching Spirit Sisters. I thought, why is it that, you know, a background of dysfunction, of trauma, makes it much more likely that somebody, well, just anecdotally speaking anyway, will have that kind of experience like that. And I don't know, like, sometimes I think there's almost like a comfort, although, you know, sometimes the experiences themselves are not comforting, but other times there is almost like a comforting spirit guide who will come, and or sometimes in the form of an imaginary friend, or, you know, that comes and is a companion to the child who's suffering. I've seen that before as well.
Again, I guess around the intensity of emotion that's involved in the situation too, you know. All very interesting. But onto your third book, Love Never Dies, which is about stories about continued communication with loved ones after they've died. Have you got a favorite story?
Oh, that's a tricky one.
I really hate that question, but I get asked.
I have a few favorite stories from all of my books. With Love Never Dies, the stories about the stories that prove how powerful these experiences are the ones that tend to stay with me, because they can literally change the course of a person's life. So, but what I mean by that is, for instance, a story that is in Love Never Dies about a young wife whose, husband who she was so in love with passed away in his sleep, and young, lovely couple, and how could this have happened? And the wife was absolutely in the depths of despair and was entertaining the idea of, taking her own life, and not just entertaining it, but planning it meticulously and methodically, and writing letters and sorting out affairs and all of that. And the only thing that stopped her was a dream visitation from her late husband. And he said, don't do this. This is not the right thing to do. You've got work to do. And it was more real than real. And she changed her mind based on that. And that's not the first story that I've heard about, how powerful an afterlife contact can be, in terms of, you've probably heard them too, Cheryl. Sometimes they're the only thing that gets through this veil of grief as well.
Yeah.
The afterlife contact. Yeah.
I heard a very curious story. You guys might have heard it too. It's from the States, and it involved a man called George Rhodenia. Have you heard that story? It was some years ago, but he had actually died, and he was in the morgue for 3 days, and the coroner, or whoever it is, medical examiner, brought him out, and they were doing an examination on him, post-mortem examination, and they did the T cut, that they do over the chest. And as he did that, George's eyes flickered, and he thought, oh, that's just a response, in the dead body, which often happens with nerves. And he continued, and it happened again. And he thought it was the same thing. And then he continued again, and it happened again. So he got a torch, and he shone it in his eyes, and realized that there was a retinal pupil response, and realized he actually wasn't fully dead. Dead. And he survived, and it took him months to learn to walk and talk again, etc. But what happened was, while he was in that state, and I guess he was having a prolonged near-death experience, but he left his body, and he went to visit his wife. And this is tying in with what you're saying, Karina. Yeah, that connection. Because she was sitting there, she was despondent, she had children, I don't have a husband, how am I going to raise these kids, all this sort of stuff. And he could hear her thoughts in his out-of-body state. And he's communicating with her as she's thinking of these men that maybe might be good fathers for her children. He's going, no, he's not good because of such and such. No, he's not the right one. Don't pick him. He's not the right one. But anyway, as it turned out, he didn't die. But I thought, wow, that is the most amazing story I've ever heard.
That is he's Russian, that guy. I remember that story now. Yeah.
So, but that connection, Karina, with that consciousness and the how that continues in those other states.
That's a great insight into, how our loved ones are potentially around us trying to communicate. Yeah.
Yeah. What do we make of where you have something that's spectral, as in like you can see through it and it's almost misty, down to ghost reports that are as solid as you or I? So how do you explain? Well, it's not, you can't explain it, but like, why is there such a range of, from what you could call like a barely bleeding through frequency, like a radio station that's you can't quite pick up, to, wow, there it is in FM stereo, and there's someone standing in front of you, often almost in a Good Samaritan style role. You'll see that's reported as being this person appeared and then this person disappeared, and they are often offering help.
Yeah, I think the first thing that occurs to me as you say that is, I wonder whether it has something to do with the spiritual development of the spirit that person and what they're capable of and what they know of life after death. And the reason I suggest that, a few reasons, but one is it's reminded me, Cheryl, of another favorite story in Love Never Dies. And there was a family in Queensland, and the daughter is the one that shared the story with me, the adult daughter, and I put it in the book. But her mum was dying of cancer, I can't remember, the uterus or ovarian cancer, and she was in her final days, her final hours at home. She was passing away, and she was a very spiritual woman. She was very, very known in her community, certain religious, spiritual, but absolute open heart giver, for the people. And for years that she had been working on an orphanage in the Philippines. So she'd been traveling there, and I think my interviewee, her daughter, might have gone there as well at some point, but she'd been going there and building, well, not building herself, but overseeing, perhaps through her church, the foundation of this orphanage to help these, drastically impoverished children in the Philippines. And so at the time that she's dying at home in Brisbane, the phone rings, and my interviewee went and answered, and it was a pastor or a priest in the Philippines that her mum had been working together with to build this orphanage. And he was saying something, and in the heat of the moment, her mum's there, she's passing away. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Pastor, I'll ring you back. It's not a good time. It's not a good time." She didn't quite grasp what he was saying, so she hung up. And then her mother eventually passed away in the next couple of days. And she said, she thought, I'd better get back to Father, Pastor, I can't remember his name. And she emailed him. And what he wanted to tell her was that, or did she speak to him on the phone? I'm trying to remember how it went. But basically he said, "Why didn't you tell me that your mum was coming? And where did she go? Where did she go?" She was there, and we toured the orphanage. She appeared out of the crowd, and she wanted to see the progress of the development and what's happening. And it was such a surprise. I wasn't expecting it. It was so lovely to see her, so lovely. And they toured the whole place. They saw everything. And all of a sudden the lady said, "Oh, got to go. I'm so sorry. Got to go." And she just took off. And he said, "Where did she go? And why did she go so fast?" And they realized that all of that had happened while the mum was, dying at home. So completely impossible by our standards. But, it's not it's not a completely unheard of account. I mean, the crisis apparition has similarities, classic crisis apparition. Yeah. But yeah, so I do wonder. So that was a woman who was steeped in spiritual development. I just wonder if somehow she was able, almost in a Jesus-like way, to put all the particles together in another location. I don't know, but yeah, it's fascinating.
It is, and isn't that what they call a peak and Darien experience, where people are interacting with those who are dead, but at the time they don't know that they're dead. To the point where they can shake a hand and be very close and say, "Hi, how you going?" But those people died.
Yeah, reminds me of a story, another one, very similar to that one. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross shared it in one of her books, and you can Google it and read her account online. But she had face-to-face interaction with a woman that she knew had passed away. And she was in her office, and they talked, and she even gave her something, like a piece of paper with something written on it. I can't remember what it was, but you can easily find this story. And, that woman was there, but yet she had passed away. Yeah. So what to make of that?
Intriguing. Oh dear. So I just wanted to ask you a couple more questions before we wind up. Having inhabited the afterlife in so many different ways, do you think it's really what people say it is, in that it's there is a place that people go after they die, or are there other possibilities?
Well, I think it's a place just like this is a place, and going on the near-death experiences accounts here as well, where they say wherever they went, it was more real than here. Many of them say that this seems like the dream. So, and just like Ben was saying about the the different types of apparitions, from something quite wispy to something substantial. I guess it's a similar kind of spectrum with the afterlife, that it's infinite, and the dimensions and the ways that we can experience is just as infinite as the many layers of consciousness and the dimensions of consciousness. I mean, it's impossible to know, but I'm convinced that that really there is no death, that it is a continuation, but in a different way.
Is it a bad experience? Like, life is a bad experience, really, isn't it? You know, and you've got a whole range of experiences, and from people from Mother Teresa down to serial killers. And so after death, a serial killer versus Mother Teresa, you can, you know, if you have a religious framework, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen based on a religious framework. But is that the case?
I do believe that our state of consciousness when we cross will determine to some extent what happens on the other side. But I also believe that there's always help. This is another message of the NDE, and that is there's always help. But, you know, our free will is respected, and we do need to call on it. But I think that, you know, turning our toes in the slightest direction of asking for help will bring it to us, and as much as in this life as in the next. But yeah, it is. I mean, I do believe that there is only life, and that life must out, you know, and it continues, and it never ends. Yeah, I do believe that.
Have all these reports of after death contact, Karina, changed your views or redirected your views or deepened your thinking in certain ways? Or, I mean, how's it affected you?
Yeah, it has deepened my thinking in many ways. And, you know, what began as a childhood fascination with mysteries and ghosts, which, you know, really intrigued me as a 7-year-old, has evolved into, you know, asking the deeper questions as to what is behind life, and is there a force of creation that is for us and, you know, helping us. And I do believe there is. And I'm also you know, quite enchanted by the NDE's descriptions of the love, and how that message of love, that it's all about love, that is just all pervasive throughout the NDE accounts. And I have to ask what that is about, you know, like, what is that? And I guess what I'm thinking is that love is the force of life, like, and our interpretation of love on earth is only but a little tiny speck of what the real thing is. And that's where I'm heading now with my work and my explorations. And it's to look at what is that love, and how can we draw on it more here on earth to enable healing. Like, sometimes I just think our poor earth and so many people are just so in need of healing. Not to say that I'm not, we all are to some extent or another, but I do feel that if we can just turn towards that light and that love and try and bring that to earth, things will get better. And so that's where I'm at with my afterlife and how it's changed my life. It's making me, you know, think twice perhaps before I snap at, you know, my husband. If he slams the front door, as he tends to do, he's a slammer and he's so loud. But, you know, just, okay, just it doesn't really matter, you know, and just little things like that. And just always a smile for somebody, even if they're grumpy. Forgiveness is a big fascination of mine as well. I feel like there's a big message there, because our world is one of retribution, and where has that gotten us, you know? Where has that gotten us? And yeah, so that's where I'm at, Cheryl.
Yeah.
Is there a fourth book in the works?
Oh, I would love to write another book. In a way, I'm actually kind of pining for it. I'm like, it needs to be done. But what it actually will be, I'm not sure. I know that I'll turn my hand to fiction at some point. So there are ideas brewing away there. But the near-death experience, to me, it really draws me, and also maybe a kind of a almost a memoir of where what the afterlife has led me to. I kind of don't mind that idea either.
I think you touched on something earlier about, you know, how your roots had an effect, your cultural roots had an effect in all of this, or had a place for it to start in all of this. So I also think for me, I would love to see a book on Indigenous practices around death, you know, and what's the word I'm trying to think of, people? Not practices, but practices too. Sorry?
Experiences, beliefs,
rituals.
rituals, yeah.
Those sorts of things. Yeah, that's fascinating. I know there's a lot of information in different places, but particularly around Indigenous people, I think that's fascinating stuff. Yeah.
I'd love to see Indigenous wisdom, you know, like respected and honored and revered, and also just, you know, practically put into practice so that we can do things better with the planet, you know?
Yeah. Well, I had a lot more questions for you, but we've run out of time. But I'd love to have you back again, Karina. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love to come back. I really enjoyed our discussion today, guys. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It was a really nice hour spent.
Oh, great. And thanks for giving up your time and doing this. And it was a pleasure once again. And I know I really enjoyed when you spoke to our Afterlife group last year. I was just watched that all again today. That's why it sort of reminded me about your story. So, and everyone's story about how they get here, yours, Ben's, mine, and then all the viewers who are watching this, are just so interesting how we all come to this point, you know. Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. And I'm a pusher of stories. I love stories, and I feel that they're very powerful, you know, little healing agents as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks again. And thank you, Ben, too.
Yes, thank you. A very thoughtful discussion.
Yes, it was.
Very, very much enjoyed it. Thank you.
And viewers, if you really like this episode, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, remember to hit the bell, and that way you'll get notifications about when all our episodes go online. So until next time, bye for now.